Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery Season 5. It was called Janal. And as the episode starts, after a briefing from Culber and Book on Lal, Michael says she'll think about allowing Book to go with her team to Trill per his request. Meanwhile, somehow, Tilly and Adira found a particular Trill's facial marking pattern on an item recovered in the previous episode, which Zora, of course, was able to tie to said individual. Michael then asks her new number one, who's now Commander Rayner, to meet with some of the crew one-on-one while she's on the planet's surface, which he agrees to do after resisting the idea at first. Adira expresses nervousness about seeing Gray again for the first time in 6 months, which seems to make the chief engineer suspect that the couple is experiencing trouble in paradise, an idea which she expresses to Commander Stamets, Adira's adoptive dad. Upon arrival at Trill, Captain Burnham must answer a riddle before being allowed to beam down, which she does successfully. She's then informed that someone from the crew has to join with the consciousness of this particular Trill symbiont's prior host, the one whose facial markings were found, in order for that prior host to communicate about the next clue with Michael, which is insane because that host's memories are contained within the symbiont, and communicating with them should be possible by communicating verbally with the current host. That's how Trills work. Anyway, at this point in the episode, we get to see Gray for the first time since last season, and I feel like a terrible person for this, but I have to point out the fact that the person playing Gray, who in real life transitioned from female to male, is now sporting ribcage length hair, as would traditionally a female person. While the person playing Adira, who is in real life and as a character, a biological female who identifies as non-binary, while sporting a super closely shorn hairdo, as would traditionally a male individual. And I do not understand this. I don't understand it. Anyway, the president of Non-Vulcan brings Ambassador Saru a plant, and while subtly displaying obvious emotion, discusses various things with him, including their engagement announcement. Lieutenant Tilly approaches the new XO to inform him that the captain ordered her to escort him around the ship for crew introductions, but he prefers to spend time tracking the Marauders, prompting Tilly to request permission to speak freely in order to explain to him that meeting with the crew is also a priority, as well as the captain's orders, at which point she's admonished because she spoke freely without the commander actually giving her permission to speak freely. He then followed this admonition by ordering her to send each of the crew to him at 5-minute intervals, there in the room where he's trying to track the Marauders. Back on Trill, Adira and Gray have an awkward reunion, and the Doctor takes on the consciousness of the previous Trill host, even though such was, as I mentioned before, completely unnecessary. And the captain and Book are led to a location where the host hid the next clue 800 years ago. Saru attends his first meeting as an ambassador and successfully negotiates the resolution to a diplomatic conflict in short order. The not Vulcan president's aide then informs Saru that the announcement of their engagement might compromise the president politically. Back on Trill, the prior host, the titular Jalal, explains that they did what they could to hide the progenitor's technology, he and his fellow scientists 800 years ago, because they feared during the Dominion War that it might be used as a terrible weapon. Meanwhile, the XO, who I'm liking more and more even though he's an asshole, has some very terse, perfunctory, and humorous meetings with some members of the crew. Back on Trill, as Michael and Book did last week, Adira and Greg talk about their relationship, and this talk also ends with them breaking up, which I can't say I'm the least bit sad about. It turns out that Jalal knows where the technology is, the technology that everyone's searching for, but won't just tell anyone because he and his fellows wanted it to be found by a worthy species after they went through the challenge of following the clues. Upon reaching the location of the clue, Book, Michael, and the body of Dr. Culber are attacked by a giant bug that they've been hoping not to get attacked by the entire time that they are walking to the clue. Book tries to use his magical Dr. Dolittle powers to communicate with it, but he's blocked by the creature. So he plays cat and mouse with it while Michael tries to solve a puzzle on the face of a rock in order to unearth the clue. Back on Discovery, Commander Stamets discovers some incredible stuff about the progenitor's technology, and when he shares that information with Commander Rayner in his meet and greet, the commander takes the information on board, but then sort of shuts down the commander and prevents him from exuberantly continuing to elaborate to any degree on the discoveries he made, prompting Tilly to knowingly speak freely without permission and go on a very insubordinate yet entirely called for rant, which the commander does not immediately punish her for. Saru and the president of Not Vulcan have a slightly terse conversation about the prospect of their engagement announcement harming her career. Book and Michael continue to deal with the giant creature, which has wounded Book, prompting Michael to treat him with a dermal regenerator. And I'm forced to wonder why, up to this point, they haven't contacted Discovery for help with the creature. Though they soon discover that they're not able to do anything like that because, of course, the minerals in the rocks around them are interfering with their communicators. It turns out that the creature and its mate are freaking out because Book and Michael are apparently and unknowingly too close to their eggs, which appear to be only rocks. Book then tries to communicate with the creatures again, and they agree to let he and Michael leave, so they do, and now they believe they have to come back to try again to get the clue. But it turns out that Jalal wanted Michael and Book to be caught near the eggs by the creatures so that he could observe how they would deal with it, peacefully or violently. And since they endeavored to do so non-violently and succeeded, he gives them the clue, which is another physical piece of the puzzle from last week, which was apparently hidden elsewhere in the area or something, where he went to retrieve it. At which point he explains that the rock was just a red herring. The clue was not actually under the rock. Saru and his lady love decide that it makes the most sense to continue to announce their engagement because otherwise it would make it look as though the president and he had something to hide, which would risk her political efficacy just as much as would the announcement itself, just maybe with different factions that she's always dealing with. Jalal's consciousness leaves the doctor, and he's immediately told by the present host that the past host thanks him for hosting him and giving him the experience of controlling a body again after so long, which proves that the crew could have communicated with the fucking prior host without the fucking consciousness transfer thing. When Michael offers to leave a contingency on the planet to help fend off the marauders when they eventually arrive, the Trill official she's speaking with assures Michael that such won't be necessary because their security can handle it. Commander Rayner and Tilly have a more cordial conversation in the crew lounge than the prior conversation they had and seem to better understand each other. Michael and the doctor talk about his experience hosting another consciousness and about how they're both seeking answers, which they hope they might find when they get a hold of the technology they're chasing. Gray, who's participating in a ritual on Trill, gives a voiceover in which he talks about how we all have to make connections with other people in life while we're on a journey, over footage of various members of the crew endeavoring to do such. Before the episode ends, we see that one of the marauders has managed to infiltrate the Trill ceremony that Gray was speaking at, without anybody noticing she's someone that shouldn't be there, including Adira, who gets a tracker placed on her by the marauder, who greeted her while barely hiding her face under a hood while nodding, which of course is hilarious, given that the Trill security guy earlier said, oh, we would be able to prevent them from coming down here. Our security would handle it. And the episode ends there. So I have mixed feelings about this episode. I mean, as always, there was some completely dumb stuff, like how this clue was supposedly hidden under a very particular rock, which wasn't all that substantial or all that conspicuous, which I guess is fine on the one hand, in the middle of like a quarry that apparently changed so little in 800 years, if at all, that that rock was just sitting there the way it was previously with the symbol noticeable on it, even though the rock wasn't even knee high, meaning that we're supposed to believe this rock was never covered by any kind of avalanche of the surrounding, quarry walls or any kind of growth, or was never destroyed by weather or anything, even though it's this like knee-high rock in the middle of a quarry where apparently giant creatures spend a lot of time, which is just completely ridiculous. I think it's also ridiculous that this host, Jalal, completely expected that when they got to the site of the rock, it would still be a place where these giant creatures spent a lot of time and laid eggs and so forth, so that he could carry out his plan of seeing how Book and Michael would deal with them. Like, how did he know those creatures hadn't all died in the past 800 years? How did he know that they didn't, migrate locations of where they would lay eggs in an 800-year period? I mean, maybe he knew that because it was a shared memory between the symbiont and the current host. But like, are we really supposed to think that they kept track of that stuff and would have known it, and that he would have been able to know it by osmosis, I find that to be quite a stretch. So it's just dumb that they said that this was something he planned to happen, because he had no way of knowing that the creature would be there 800 years later. It's just ridiculous. Apparently, in the 32nd century, universal translators don't seem to work on these bugs, even though they work on all kinds of creatures, both humanoid and not, and always have. Which, of course, is just to facilitate the plot of them having to find a way to resolve the issue of these creatures menacing them non-violently. But it's just dumb. Like, why didn't the universal translator work? You know? Another thing about this episode I didn't like is that there are too many plots in it, which is something that this show suffers from all the time. It's not a big deal if you have an A plot and a B plot in a show, okay? But when you have an A plot, a B plot, a C plot, a D plot, etc., all in the same episode, and then all of those threads carry over from episode to episode, it's ridiculous. What they're supposed to do is write episodes with an A plot and a B plot. And any other plots that they have kicking around are supposed to get their own A or B plot line in their own episodes. In other words, this episode should have been about the A plot and the B plot. And the other plots that were in this episode should have been the A plot and the B plot of another episode, not the C plot and the D plot in this episode. But the problem with that is that it means they have to use up the next story element and the next story element of the A and the B plot sooner. And it doesn't necessarily shorten the season, because you would still have the C plot and the D plot that you can make a new episode out of, and so you're not losing an episode in the episode count. But what it does is it shortens the length of time that they can drag out the central plot of the season, the A and the B plot of this serialized season. And I think that's just the fact that this show should be episodic versus serialized, given the ability of the writers to craft a serialized story that can last the length of even a short 10 or 12 episode season if it takes up 35 minutes of a 50-minute show every week versus 25 or 20 when it's intercut with these C and D plots. And that to me just confirms, my theory that episodic television is better than serialized television, certainly in the hands of some writers. If these writers were crafting deep enough A and B plot stories, they could make each episode about only the A and the B plot and still have enough to work with that the season would last 12 to 15 episodes, with some episodes being made up of different A and B plots that are now being done as C and D plots, without prematurely finishing the A and B plot of the season because they spent more time on it per episode, more time on them per episode. But since they're not that talented, they need to work C and D plots into each episode to fill the runtime without getting to the end of the A and B plot story before they get to 12 or 15 episodes. And it's just painfully obvious. And on top of that, some of the C and D plots are dumb. Like, I don't care about Adira and Gray. It's stupid and it's filler. Less stupid is the story between Saru and the president of Not Vulcan, but even that, I couldn't be arsed. I don't care about that. And, as much as it's true that I don't care about it, it wouldn't bother me if it were the plot of the occasional episode, if it were either the A or the B plot of an occasional episode, like they would do with Miles and Keiko on Deep Space Nine. But what they're doing is they're making this story a significant part of each episode, just as significant as the A and B plot. And it's just annoying to have the A and or B plot interrupted every 10 minutes, every week, for this stupid plot that, really could be handled in 1 or 2 episodes if it were given the bulk of those 1 or 2 episodes in an episodic season. So it just annoys the crap out of me. Now, I said I had mixed feelings about the episode, and so far I've only said bad stuff. I did actually enjoy some of what they did in this episode that carries over from stuff they did in the previous 2 episodes, having to do with Commander Rayner. I think this is a very good character. I think the character is an over-the-top hard ass, and I don't like that about him entirely. I like it about him in the sense that it's a character that can be shown to change and grow over time from this sort of hard ass into someone who's not so much of a hard ass and who works on himself and changes. And it's an opportunity for character growth. So I appreciate it on that level, but he's a little over the top. So it's a little hard to swallow. But if I put that aside as a suspension of disbelief, I think what they've come up with in this character as a foil for not only the captain, but apparently Tilly was really good. And I said that last week. So I'm looking forward to what they do with this character. I think they did some good work on it this week. I think the stuff Tilly said to him in this episode, both when she was angry and when she was kind of reconciling with him, were true and were important things that he's going to need to deal with in his new position. And I just think where they're going with this particular character is good, and I think it works, and I think it's Star Trek. It's very reminiscent of what made Star Trek great in the 90s. And so I'm glad it's there. It's a vestige of real Star Trek that they've finally started doing on this show in the final season. And it works, and I enjoy it quite a bit. I also enjoy the Tilly character. I always have, even though I thought she was too goofy for Starfleet and that they needed to tone it down, which they've never done. But other than that, I find her charming. The actress does a great job. And in this episode, the actress and the character hit it out of the park. I thought they were fantastic. I thought the lines they gave her were fantastic. I thought her motivations came across fantastically. And I believed that her exasperation with Rayner was real, and she was right, and I felt it right along with her. And so that whole dynamic in this episode was fantastic. And if they continue that kind of thing going forward, I will continue to like it. And the episodes will continue to at least be a little bit good. Even with Michael, he had another conversation with her in the beginning of this episode that I thought was fantastic. The banter back and forth was well written, well acted, and moving and thought-provoking, and a great setup for the rest of what happened in this episode vis-a-vis Rayner. So if they do more of that and less of the stupid this season, which would be a frickin' first for this show in the final season, I will like the season better than I have liked past seasons. But so far, it just seems like there are just going to be little moments that are good, and the rest is going to be dumb. Once again, the action was great. Once again, it looks gorgeous, but it was mostly dumb. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. Because I think Sonequa Martin Green is excellent. I actually like the Michael Burnham character more so far this season than I ever have. And that's good, but there's just so much dumb. Like, just them keeping Book around at all is dumb. Even though I like the character. I think it would be a great character for their own show. But in this setting, it doesn't really work, just in general. And it's unfortunate because they shoehorn him into these situations, and they belabor it, and it's not good. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this episode without repeating myself. So I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back to do a recap and review of next week's episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.